So, hello everyone, my name is Mark, and this is my senior capstone proposal, and my topic is about color theory and the perception of color. So, a little bit about me. Um, I'm a transfer student from UH Maui College. I graduated last year in the spring and earned my associates in creative media, and that's where I am right now. I'm on Maui, so I'm an online student. Um, I graduated from Maui High School back in 2019, and I was a part of their arts and communications program, which is how I grew my passion for graphic design. So my program of study is creative media, and I am in the concentration of general creative media. So first things first, I'm going to state my thesis statement, and then I'm going to talk about my objective and rationale of my research. Then I'll be talking about the plans for my senior project capstone, and then address the significance of my proposed project with my research. So my thesis statement is color theory is essential to how we live our lives because different colors have underlying associations and are perceived differently from person to person. All right, so why did I choose this route for my project? Or, why did I choose this topic? So we all know, we've all learned that, color evokes emotion. It means specific things. Like, for example, we all know red is like anger, right? Or yellow is happiness. Um, and as a graphic design student, I've been studying graphic design for like years already. It's for so long. And I've always been taught about, color theory and how important it is to use it. But recently, um, I've seen, I've, I came across one article where it argued that color theory is not legitimate, it's not important, it doesn't matter, which kind of intrigued me in a way because, like I've said, I've been taught about color theory for so long and how important it is. So I went, searched, I went to search for more articles and, discussions on it, and I found a lot actually, which was pretty surprising. And what's crazy is that these articles or these discussions are from both design students and designers in the field. So, that was pretty interesting to learn about that, color theory or just uh, saying that, like, for example, yellow is happiness. All of that is like not important. And because they argue that color is subjective. You cannot prove that yellow is definitively happiness, or you cannot prove red is anger. Like it's not concrete evidence, right? And so that kind of, I scratched my head. I was thinking, that's kind of correct. Like you can't prove that. Like concretely, and it's kind of similar to astrology in a way because, astrology is about the zodiac signs and like placing these personality traits with like different, star signs or whatever. And like that's concrete, it's a pseudoscience, right? All of that stuff is anecdotal. And so with this project, I want to kind of argue or challenge the question, is color theory legit? Is it important? And I do believe it is important because unlike astrology, which I do believe is a pseudoscience, it's not really like concrete. I do believe that astrology is not a legitimate science. I think that color theory is more legitimate because there is evidence on it and the way it affects people, and it goes down to the biologicals, such as like, brain activity, gender, all of that kind of stuff. So I'll go more into that later on, but so for my argument, I believe it is important and that we should utilize it. So for my senior capstone plans, so my project is going to be a text to color study with AI. It's going to compare the results of a color palette created by human versus artificial intelligence because AI, pulls um, knowledge and information from databases and on, things from online. So it has a pretty big knowledge base, which will be kind of interesting to see, what it comes up with. And then my deliverable will be a social media page, specifically an Instagram page because it's more visual. And this design is a collaborative exploration between the creator and AI to see how humans conceptualize color associations versus algorithms, the side-by-side critical analysis and crowdsourced opinions, which is the Instagram, further drives insight. It allows assessing interpretive color skills from both human designer and AI perspectives. So, for the significance of this project, first of all, color theory is important across many fields of design, graphic design, fashion design, interior design, architecture, even animation, and a whole other careers in design. So it's imperative for future designers to learn about color theory because color is an important communication tool, right? And color can serve a function. You can't just slap a color on something because it just looks nice. There has to be a purpose or reason why you put that color on there because, although color is such a small thing, and we often take it for granted, like using the right or wrong colors can make a huge difference in the effectiveness or the success of a design. So the second significance is the expansion of technology. Technology has advanced greatly in the last century and continues to advance now even more than ever. So, we got colored photographs starting in the 1890s. We got cameras starting to take pictures with color. We got colored television in the 1950s. And then over the next few years, we got computers and then smartphones popping up with colored screens. And they utilize, IPS displays or OLED displays, which are more color accurate displays. We also have color systems that we developed for ourselves, such as RGB, CMYK, Pantone. And now, today, we have things like virtual reality and AI. And so, as technology has, progressed even more and more, um, the the color output has just gotten better more and more. So, color is important in this context in the sense that, we're trying to give the best possible experience for the users of these technologies. And things like color accuracy and giving, a colorful experience or setting a mood is very crucial and important for these users. All right, so for the data, first I'm going to touch on uh, things that are biological. So it's been proven many times that color blindness is much more prevalent um, among men, right? I am actually colorblind myself. When I tell people that, they think or assume that I only see black and white, which is not true. I have, uh, color blindness, there's a degree to it. So for me, I have red, green color blindness. So I have a hard time distinguishing hues between red, green, brown. And I believe that's the most common type of color blindness. So that alone already is a difference in color perception because we have people who are colorblind. But I found this study where they had participants, both men and women, who had normal color vision. They passed the color blindness test, and they found that even though both those men and women had normal color vision, the women were able to see more colors than the men because the genes for the pigments for red and green cones are in the X chromosomes, and only women have two while men have one, which is kind of interesting because men are mostly colorblind, and the red and green colorblindness is the most common, which I found interesting. So gender is also a factor in the difference of color perception. And I wanted to dive a little more deeper and touch on blind people, right? If I'm going to say and argue that color theory and color is important, what about the blind, right? Is it important to them then? So I found this very interesting study where it tested both blind people and sighted people. And they were given, prompts such as, what color is this? Or like, why is it that color? And surprisingly, there were many similar results. which I found interesting. And from the study, I learned that blind people, they think of color as more of concepts. Like for us, concepts is like justice or bravery or minimalism, right? You can't touch those things. It's just a concept. And um, that's the way blind people see colors, concepts, kind of like associating uh, things with color. But even with us, concepts have colors tied to them. Like minimalism is white, right? Happiness is yellow. So blind people and sighted people think and come to the conclusion of colors very similarly. And they even went as far as to placing these individuals in an imaginary island where they have never seen anything before, like physically, they've never seen these items. It was just hypothetical. They were asked, what's the color of a rock, or what's the color of this treasure chest? Like, this is all fictitious. And all of the results were pretty much identical. So it just proves that blind people, um, can think like sighted people and have similar conclusions regarding color. So for blind people, still it does kind of matter. Color does matter because they learn the meanings through their environment. And then this one, for this data, it's more of the effectiveness and the use of color across certain contexts. So for one study, it surveyed many people, what the perceived emotion or association, perceived word or perceived color ties into the personality trait. And we have typical things, such as, for example, youthfulness is very high in pink. Um, we got imaginative, which is really high in pink. Pink is very young and bright. And we also have daring, which is red. Because we often think red is a very bold and aggressive color. So there are perceptions of color um, with personality traits. There is a link to it that a majority of people agree upon. And with this data on the top right, it was interesting. This data is about colors of a website. So does that matter if you choose a different color scheme for a website? And it found that blue was perceived to be the most trustworthy website, and red and black were the least, which was pretty interesting because blue is often associated with trustworthiness, um, and that's why a lot of bank companies use blue in their logo. And also for this one, the bottom one is even more interesting because it studied the use of colors in charitable donations. So it used both orange and blue, and it found that using blue graphics and coloring in the campaigns for the charity garnered more donations than using orange. So that was very, very interesting, and it just shows that using the right or wrong colors can make a big difference. So for my target audience, obviously I want to target color theory skeptics. That's the whole reason why I'm uh, pursuing this, is to kind of prove that color theory is important. But also Gen Z and millennials, because they're the most tech savvy across the world, preferably people ages 15 to 40, which encompasses both future designers, people who are in school to become designers, and current designers who are already established and in the field. So for my proposed solution, color theory is important and should be utilized and taught. And also with the rise of AI, I think human input is a lot more important and meaningful rather than using AI input. So for my process, first I'm going to create a list of 25 to 30 words and phrases and feed them into a random word generator so that's fair and random. and then it will spew out a text prompt. And me and the AI assistant will create separate color palettes based on the interpretation of that word prompt. And then next, I'm going to do a comparative analysis. So compare and contrast my color palette that I came up with the AI's color palette and kind of see if there's any similarities or differences. Some of the things that I may ask myself is, which more accurately captures the essence of the text? Are there any prominent colors that we both picked? Unique ones? What might lead to similarities or differences? So it's just an analysis of both of our results. And then for the post, like I said, my deliverable is going to be an Instagram page. And so I'm going to be posting the text prompt, my color palette, and then the AI's color palette and my analysis with that on Instagram. And I'll be asking my viewers and followers, if they agree with mine or the AIs to kind of do some engagement. I may also make it like so that it won't state if it's mine's or the AIs, that could be interesting. So for my deliverable, so basically this is going to be about generative AI, right? So I found something similar to this is generative AI in Adobe products. We have it in like Adobe Photoshop and Illustrator. I've seen it in videos a lot where you could like select an area on your work and then type in a prompt and it will generate an image for you. But for my project, instead of generating an image, it's going to be generating a color palette based on, the knowledge it pulls from in the internet or in databases. And like I said, my deliverable is going to be a social media page. So I found these two social media pages. So the first one on the far right is ChatGPT Tricks. It just basically publishes work of generative AI, kind of like something interesting for people to see and, what AI would think if you give it prompts. And then the second one is Color Nerd on TikTok, which discusses more about like color concepts, perceptions, a lot more technical and analytical aspects of the color spectrum. So um, my deliverable or my page is going to be kind of a combination of both because I'm going to be working with generative AI and posting my results. And also the comparative analysis is kind of like the TikTok page that I mentioned, where I talk about, why we may have the same results or may have different results. So that will be interesting to see. All right, that concludes the end of my senior capstone proposal presentation. Let me know if you guys have any questions.